Hi, welcome to Innovation Root Studio. I'm your host Noopur and I'm really excited to have Mr. Doc Norton with us for the interview. Doc is a software delivery professional and he's working to make the world of software development a better place. Hi Doc, welcome to our studio.
Well, thank you.
Doc, to begin with, what is most important to make or build a collaborative team?
That's a good question. So, most environments, I think the biggest problem is that we want folks to collaborate, but we're still incentivizing individual performance. So if you really want to foster collaboration in any kind of environment, you've got to think about what are the reward systems in that environment. How are we promoting people? How are we acknowledging them for their good work? If what we're doing is we are still recognizing people for individual performance, then we're going to create a system where collaboration always kind of comes second. So we've got to build collaboration into the way that we actually review, the way that we actually, reward and incentivize folks. And that could be anything from making it part of the actual review, focusing more on rewards and systems around group behavior versus individual behavior. That's really kind of the essence of it. Anything else that you do, you can give people tools, you can give people techniques, but if they know that their opportunity for advancement is about them individually and not about them collaborating, none of the tools and techniques matter. It is about how we are actually, what is the system rewarding us for? Yeah. That's the first thing, I think.
Doc, in your recent book, Escape Velocity, you seem to suggest teams not to use velocity as a metric. Please share your views around it.
So the book Escape Velocity actually came out of a talk that I had written probably 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. At that time, the thing that I was seeing was a lot of teams were taking velocity and they were setting a goal for it. They were saying, hey, if our velocity is 17, man, if we could just get to 20 points, then we'd be doing so much better. And I started looking at what are the side effects of this, what might happen. And it turns out that when you take a goal, when you take a metric like velocity and you set a goal for it, it actually changes things. It changes what that metric means, and therefore the goal doesn't mean what you once thought it did. And this is actually Goodhart's law. So Goodhart was an advisor to the Bank of England in economics, and at the time the bank was looking at setting certain policy around some financial procedures related to the government, and he was warning them, hey, let's not take some of these measures that we use to determine how's the economy doing and set targets for them. The moment we do that, the metric no longer means what it once did, and so the target doesn't mean what it's supposed to. And so that was kind of the beginning of it. But as I did more and more research, I began to realize that velocity as a metric is not very helpful. So where did it come from? It came from early days of XP and Scrum, and it was effective for many of those teams. But it was effective for them because they were high-performing teams, working on discrete projects, and they had already achieved this kind of advanced level of performance. And when you get to a certain point where your throughput is very stable, your sizing is all pretty much the same, the team is performing really well, then things like a metric like velocity can actually be used fairly reasonably for forecasting, can actually be used somewhat reasonably to determine if the team is doing better or worse. But most teams aren't at that level of performance. And when you are, velocity as a metric doesn't tell you enough. It doesn't tell you if your team is healthy. It doesn't tell you if you're performing well. It's usually highly variable. And so the whole book is really about, kind of pointing out flaws with velocity, especially for early teams or teams that are not that high functioning, and what are other metrics that we could be looking at that help us get to root causes for variability in velocity, that help us get to a point where we have consistent flow, we've got good throughput. And then it turns out that if you're tracking all of those things and you're using them well, then you don't need velocity anyway. So the title Escape Velocity is a little bit of a play on words, but the whole idea behind it is basically velocity is unfortunately only a good metric if you are a high performing team, and most teams aren't, so you need other tools to help you get there.
So it's a wonderful point that you have made, but how do you think we can bring that shift? Because mostly the velocity is the metric being used in the organization.
It is. Unfortunately, even the way that it's being used. So the more that I've dug into this and the more research that I've done, so one of the number one things that velocity is used for is forecasting, right? Well, and you can call this whatever you want. You can say, no, we use it for iteration planning. Well, that's an estimation of how much work you're going to get done. That's a forecast. We use it for burn-ups and burn-downs. Those are estimations of, when will this feature or deliverable or project be completed? Again, those are actually just forecasts. What's the technique that we use? We typically take a look at what's our velocity, maybe what's the average velocity over the last 3 iterations or whatever it might be, right? So typically we're using the average velocity, and we take what we think is the amount of work that's done, and we divide it by the average velocity, and we figure out how long it's going to take. We say, okay, this is when it's going to be. Well, interestingly enough, if what we're using is the average velocity, what we're using is the median. If we're using the median, what we're using is the 50th percentile, which means that the estimating that we're doing, the forecasting we're doing, is as good as flipping a coin. You've got a 50-50 chance of coming in before that date and a 50% chance of coming in after that date. So even as a forecasting tool, it's not a very good tool for us to use. So part of this is just about education and helping people recognize and understand that, hey, there may be better ways to do these things. And a lot of teams look at variable velocity. Last week we had, last iteration we had 10 points. The iteration before that we had 24. The iteration before that we had 6. What's going on? There's no information inside of velocity that tells you what's going on. So we need to start looking at things like a cumulative flow diagram. We need to start looking at things like, well, all right, how big are our batches? How much WIP do we have at any given time? What types of interruptions do we have? What's the quality of the code that we're dealing with? And all of these things are factors that are underlying causes for why velocity is variable. So yes, it's very prominent. It's prominent because it's what we learned, and now I think it's time for us to start looking at, all right, how can we get better at this? And getting better at this isn't about single loop learning, where we continue to try to get better at using velocity. Let's look at some double loop learning. How do we get better at achieving the outcomes that we want, and what are other things that we could do to get us there? I don't know how exactly will affect the change. It's why I do the talk. It's why I wrote the book. And there's plenty of other people in the industry that are talking about this stuff as well, be it metrics coming from Lean or other places. But I think it's just going to be a matter of over time giving people different alternatives. If we look at the work of Troy McGinnis, he's doing a bunch of stuff around metrics with teams. Some really deep and rich information there that's super helpful for folks. So I think it's just getting the word out.
As we are talking about high-performing teams, please make your choice between empowering a team by delegating them or making them accountable in any other way.
Okay, so the options there are to either basically I'm either empowering the team by delegating to them some level of work that I've got, or I am making them accountable for
the delivery of value.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that when we delegate, accountability comes with that. But I think if we really want to, if we're looking at high performing teams, delegation's a reasonable place to start. But the more that we look at if we look at the type of work that we're doing. So this actually goes back a little bit. So it's not even about the leadership yet, right? So if we look at the type of work that we're doing, years ago, so when I first started writing software, it was 30 years ago. And what were we doing? We were automating accounting systems. We were automating filing systems. docketing systems for law firms, this type of stuff. And what was this stuff? It was very well defined, very codified manual processes that had been, the efficiency had been driven out or into them, and now we were automating those steps. So we knew fundamentally what it was that we were supposed to build. We didn't necessarily know how we were going to build it, but we knew exactly what we were supposed to build. This was complicated work. It requires analysis, but great for Scrum, and it can be executed in a hierarchy environment. So delegation can happen for that type of work. But as you fast forward, we as a software community have automated away most of the things that were automatable, that were once manual processes. And what's the software that we're writing now? Most of the software that we're writing now, we're discovering as we go along. We don't know exactly what it's supposed to be. We're either trying to capture a new market, we're trying to invent a new thing, we're trying to find a new angle on a concept. Everything we're doing now is innovative and emergent. That type of work, hierarchy, actually hinders our ability to be effective. Delegation hinders our ability to be effective. With this type of work, this is complex work now, and it's emergent, and in building the thing, we learn what the thing is supposed to be. It requires small teams of high diversity, and we need the intelligence of everyone on that team contributing to making decisions. A manager can't know enough to make all of these decisions, can't know enough to even know if the decisions the team is making are actually the right ones or not. It's a completely different structure. And so really creating high-performing teams is no longer about delegating anything. Leaders now need to be in a facilitative role. Their job is to help this team work together, to think, to discover, to learn. So it's a very different look at work altogether. The accountability lives with the team. The team is doing the work, but there's much less delegation in this type of work than there once was.
So there's a common notion that by delegating, you're making them accountable. Do you agree with this thing?
I think so. If you're doing it well, right? If we assume in the first place that I have authority and responsibility, and I alone have that, and then I'm going to delegate some of that to you, if I'm doing it effectively, one, I'm providing you autonomy to decide how it is that you're going to do that work, right? I can tell you what it is that I need done, but I want you to figure out how to do that. And with that comes accountability. Now, it's probably shared. If I'm truly delegating something to you or to whomever, and it doesn't go well, not only are you accountable because it was your assign, but I'm probably accountable too, because in those types of structures, someone probably delegated it to me, or at least expected that I was going to see this through, that you're working under my governance. It's just a completely different structure. So what I'm talking about when we talk about high performing, that delegation doesn't necessarily exist anymore. But they're just very different ways of working, very different organizational structures. But yes, I think if you're actually delegating, accountability does come with it. It doesn't mean that I, as the person that delegated it, have zero accountability. We're now sharing that.
So right. If I understand it correctly, there's a common destination, but the path could be different to reach there.
Yep.
Or the time taken to reach there could also be different.
Could also be different, yep. Yeah.
Doc, you have been mentioning autonomy, connection, and excellence as organizational motivators. Please share your thoughts behind it.
Yeah, so this is actually work that came out of stuff that I was doing, pre-Groupon, but really at Groupon, this thinking started to really solidify. And so if you go back and you look at the work of Daniel Pink around autonomy, mastery, and purpose, right? So those are kind of the three motivators for individuals. And Pink's book Drive is on that. Well, I had read much of the same research as well as research on team dynamics, and I was really looking at. So when you look at autonomy, mastery, and purpose, that makes sense. That's about individual performance. But what takes us to that next step when we're looking at teams and organizations? And it turns out that autonomy, very much so, still exists. The ability to actually make decisions about the way that we do the work, right? That is critically important, especially in creative and knowledge work. I kind of talked about this already, but we're not automating simple things. We're inventing new things, and that requires a different way of thinking. But then organizationally, mastery, yes, that's important to the individual. Excellence is important to the broader organization. Within excellence is my own personal mastery, but also within excellence is an organization being able to set clear vision, clear values, something that the individuals can connect to, where people can see line of sight from the work that they're doing to the mission of the organization, and people can see the path from where they are today to where it is that they're going, and they can track that path, and that's all about excellence. So we're taking mastery, and we're expanding it, right? Purpose, I think, kind of fits into there. Connection is extremely important for organizations. It is about us, one, connecting again to the vision of the organization, understanding kind of the purpose of the organization, but also internally connecting to one another. We share knowledge, we share successes, we share losses. How do we as a group coalesce on our leading practices, the way that we do things? How do we build empathy within the organization so that we can better work together to solve these very complicated challenges? So it's autonomy, connection, and excellence as kind of building blocks, fundamental motivators. It didn't take us too long to realize that there was a gap in all of that, that while autonomy, connection, and excellence are certainly important, you need all of those things, there's one additional dimension, and that is diversity. And that is, the diversity, when we talk about it from an organizational perspective, is diversity of thought. It is about having individuals with different areas of expertise, with different backgrounds and different experiences, bringing those unique perspectives into the organization, and then creating teams of diverse individuals so that you are getting as broad a perspective as possible on any problem that you're trying to solve, and ideally are moving towards the best solution. And when you've got that autonomy, the connection, and the excellence, and you mix that with diversity, you end up with really good solutions. Moving away from the person highest in the hierarchy gets to make decisions. Instead, what you do is you honor knowledge over hierarchy, and you honor group over individual, and you actually get better solutions.
Do you think intuition can play a big role when leading or managing people or work?
I do. So intuition is an interesting notion, right? So what is intuition, if you think about it? What is it actually? We talk about gut feeling, right? Where does that come from? I know that if we actually look at the human body, some of the things that we know about it today is that we have more than one brain. We know that we have a brain here, right? But it turns out that there are actually connections and collections of nerves that are in the heart and in the gut that operate very similarly to the way that the brain does. And so I think we've known this for a long time, just not necessarily scientifically, because you hear about people making decisions from the heart. You hear about people making decisions from the gut. And it turns out that that's actually true, that as a part of our autonomic system, these things come into play. Intuition is fundamentally our ability to make decisions very quickly based on our understanding of the world. I think that it is the way that people always make decisions. That we pattern match, we we match against our own experience, which is shaped by our bias. That's true. But the decisions that are made, if we look at the way the brain works, the way the body works, we make decisions almost instantaneously, and then we rationalize them. Then, if it isn't the type of decision that we just go, yep, that's fine, and we keep moving, or it's the type of decision that says, hey, run, or freeze, or fight, right? Those types of decisions. It comes into the executive function, and we consider it. Is that a good decision? I think that's a good decision. I think it's a good decision for these reasons. And we rationalize why it's a good decision. Or I think it's a bad decision for these reasons, and I rationalize why it's a bad decision, and I decide not to do the thing. So all decisions fundamentally come from intuition and are then considered and rationalized. And I think that intuition comes from our experience. The more time that I have spent in organizations, working with people, working on software, the more exposure I get, the more patterns I see, the more expeditiously I make certain decisions because my intuition tells me so. Really, it's because my experience tells me so, but it is where it comes from. I'm not saying it's always good, because as we mentioned, that pattern matching is biased, right? It is biased by our own experiences, it's biased by our own beliefs. So sometimes we make decisions from intuition and they're good, and sometimes we make decisions from intuition and they're not so good. There's also this whole other phenomena of what makes a good decision or a bad decision, right? We as humans tend to engage in what is called resulting. So what happens is I make a decision, I execute on that decision. If it ends well, I must have made a good decision. If it ends poorly, I must have made a bad decision. That's resulting. What we're looking at is the outcome dictates the value of the decision. But if we step back for a second and we look at situations where statistically I made the right decision. So from a probability perspective, if I hire this one more engineer, it increases the probability that we'll have this skill set which will get us, this thing done on time. So I hire that one more engineer, and it turns out that we missed the date and somebody else quits because I hired that engineer. Was it a bad decision? Well, if statistically it would have led to a good result, it was still a good decision. The fact that other factors I couldn't see led to a disfavorable outcome doesn't mean I made a bad decision. So decision theory is actually a very interesting spectrum to get into. But anyway, sorry, very long answer. Yes, I think intuition comes into play.
So do you remember any instance when you thought that it's going to be a bad decision, but it turns out to be a success?
Oh, man. For me, yeah, it probably happens all the time. I'm not too bad at this. I don't know, bad, whatever. But I do have a tendency sometimes to second guess when I take on commitments, right? I might agree to do an article for a periodical, and then almost immediately I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know this material well enough, and I don't have the time, and I'm overcommitted, and this is gonna be a train wreck, and they're like, I just can't. And then I, settle in, calm down, do the work, get the thing done, everything goes fine. Yeah, certainly had those. And I've certainly had plenty of situations where I thought I was making good decisions, and then, and maybe I was statistically, but the results, didn't work out so well. I'm a bit of a serial entrepreneur. I've always done fairly well in the software space, but I've ventured out and I've done other things. And sometimes I accidentally launched a candle company once, and I didn't think that was a good decision. And it ran for 9 years and did fairly well. And I once launched a consultancy that I thought was going to do great, And 2.5 years in, we just had to close it because we couldn't make enough money. So,
Now let's come to your favorite leadership advice.
Oh man, that is a tough question. What is my favorite leadership advice? Man, it's funny too because I talk about leadership so much. I tweet about it a lot, and it's definitely a thing that I talk about a great deal. I think I don't know if it's advice or not. One of the things that I really try and keep in mind and try and help others see is that leadership is everywhere. It's not a position. It's not something that is bestowed upon you in terms of, I got promoted into leadership, right? Leadership really is about taking personal action, doing the things that you think are, the right things, modeling the behavior that you think is beneficial and good and right, and whether it's one person that sees that and says, yeah, you know what, I respect that, I honor that, or it's 1,000 people or 10,000 people. Essentially, we're all leaders, whether we recognize it or not, right? That in our day-to-day activities and the things that we do, others see, they observe, and we inspire each other. So, it's not necessarily advice for leaders. I think it's maybe something for everyone to remember that, it isn't a title, it isn't a position. It is about being who you are, being genuine, having integrity, living your life the way that you feel life should be lived, and others will see that and others will follow.
It's a beautiful thought. I hope the audience is listening that and would try to imbibe that and believe that they are also the leaders in their own world.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Thank you, Doc. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for sharing your thoughts with us. It was wonderful having you.
No, my pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.